The early days of a company, we were three people at the beginning, made our first hire a few months in. It's the most exciting time. I mean, it's a scramble. You're all wearing lots of hats. You're all trying to figure out problems. I used to joke and say, like, I'm the CEO, but I also go to Costco for snacks.
Our featured speaker today is an entrepreneur and global explorer passionate about responsible AI. As the SVP of Global Partnerships at Synergist Technology, he utilizes his strategic leadership experience to foster a collaborative environment, navigating complex challenges with empathy and insight. Jasper, it's a great pleasure to have you as our featured guest today and to get to speak with you about your journey. Thank you so much for coming on.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I was wondering if you might kick us off and just kind of take us back in your journey. Do you feel like there were some early life influences that kind of really affected your personal and professional development? And locations can be included in that too. I know you said you grew up in Ireland.
So I grew up in Ireland during a very different time in Ireland. It was quite a poor country. And I think, like a lot of Irish people who moved, who left for economic opportunity, viewing, especially a place like the US, through that lens, there's a lot of opportunity there if you look for it. So I think as a kid and young teenager in Ireland, I had some entrepreneurship to me. I would flip bike parts and stuff like that. But then getting to the US, and especially given that time, this is sort of later 90s, early 2000s, internet's blowing up, and there was a tremendous amount of opportunity there. And I was lucky enough to study that, work in it very early on. And that's what my career has been built on.
It's really cool. I love that you were like flipping bike parts from a young age. I think that sort of entrepreneurial spirit from someone who's young is something that's really powerful. For some people, it doesn't come naturally, but for someone who does, I think it's actually like it has your mind in the right place to do entrepreneurial things. And that's, I think, phenomenal. Can I ask if you could give us just a bit of like a rundown of where you've gone in your career and what you think are like key highlights, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. So having gotten to the US, it's interesting. I was a telemarketer for a bit. I was quite a good telemarketer. And then I moved from that to a very early stage tech company that became Ad Knowledge, which was a behemoth 15 years ago or so in the ad tech space, and was quite a large network. The skills I got from that is just like knowing how to go and pursue sales, how to grow a business. And the entry point to this career for me was just that, going and doing business development, taking this product that not a lot of people understood and then managing to sort of create profitable sort of relationships out of that. There were a couple of key points within that. I mean, one was when iKnowledge raised money and then bought a couple of other businesses. I was involved in the onboarding and sort of merging of the products and cultures for that. Went to London for a little bit to help bring one company on. We had another entity in Australia that we brought on. Seeing these products expand globally and also learning how important culture is to how those businesses execute, how important communication is when you might have very different sort of styles and standards of communication across different companies. That gave me a soft business acumen in ways. Like, it's not just numbers, it's about people, how they operate, how they feel, how they work every day, and how they communicate with each other. And that informs how I've managed businesses from then on. That was really key. I think later, I worked for AdKnowledge for about 10 years. I was very steeped in ad tech. I moved from that into doing venture work for a fund based in Kansas City. That gave me insights into all sorts of other businesses and showed me what else was out there, what people were doing and trying. I didn't really like being on the investor side of the table. I thought I would, but I always wanted to be on the founder side. That then gave me insights necessary to go and launch my own firm and raise money and go through all of those things, which I didn't feel like I had the knowledge, enough knowledge to do before that.
Thanks for sharing that with us. And I was actually like looking into Epigraph a little bit and honestly just like thinking about how some people start a company and move off right away, but you have stayed on as a board member. And I was wondering if you can kind of talk about the company in its early days and kind of what that meant to you and how you knew when it was time for you to move into a different role and move on.
Sure. Yeah. So The early days of a company, we were three people at the beginning, made our first hire a few months in. It's the most exciting time. I mean, it's a scramble. You're all wearing lots of hats. You're all trying to figure out problems. I used to joke and say, like, I'm the CEO, but I also go to Costco for snacks. You have to sort of do everything necessary, and it's exciting and enjoyable and sort of all consuming. Post fundraising, we grew quite a lot, and our market sort of came up to meet us due to the pandemic. We got a real tailwind from that. Post pandemic, as things started to shake out, there were some changes in how people were buying products on the marketing side. The reason I chose to change direction is just there was a difference of opinion on where the business should go. I thought we should exit. My co-founders decided they wanted to continue with it. So I'm still a major shareholder and board member, but 5 years is a long time to be running a business like that. And I wanted to get into the AI space. Like, I just saw so much happening and so much growth. So I left earlier this year, got in, and I'm working in the AI space now.
That's super interesting. I feel like there is, at least for me, as someone who also really enjoys sort of the early stages of a company, I think there is always a bit of a ticking timer in regards to I don't want to be there when it's starting to slow down and everyone's sort of figured out all the systems and everything's processized and everything. How do you tell when you want to move on to somewhere, to something else or someone? And I guess now that you've been in AI for almost a year, what do you think about it as a space? Like, do you think you'll stay there for a longer period or do you think you'll be there for a short period? What's your perspective?
I should say on the transition piece, it's hard, right? It's like we all have this kind of some cost concept in ourselves where we invest in something for a long time. And it's difficult to close chapters and look forward to the new ones, especially when you've built something yourself. It was not my first time, and I'd done other things prior to this that aren't on my LinkedIn, but different businesses that I'd sort of founded, grown, and left or exited. It's really hard to know. It's kind of a judgment call. It's a bit like at the beginning of a business, you're making a leap, right? You're sort of jumping off that cliff to start something. It's a bit of a leap when you leave as well. And in many ways, it's just as scary. But when there's a lack of alignment, I mean, businesses like this work when everyone's pulling in the same direction. Everyone knows where you're going and you have a North Star. If that North Star deviates and there's a disagreement on that, then it's going to be very difficult to succeed, right? So I think at that point, when you realize that those paths have diverged, which they inevitably do, right? There are very few businesses where you can go for 5 or 6 years and everyone fully agrees on the path. Once that happened, it was pretty clear. And I'd found myself for 6 months or so before this, looking at other businesses, being very curious about what was being built behind the scenes and looking at the funding markets and what money was going into. So my curiosity was really piqued about what else there was out there. So I knew when my eyes are wandering a bit to other things that that time was coming, and then it did, and I'm sort of onto something new. In terms of the AI space, I would love to make predictions around it. I just simply don't know. This is not AI specific necessarily, but I thought the Google Willow release is one of those blog posts earlier this week where it said that it lends credence to the notion that there are parallel universes. I think that's where we are with AI. There's so much theoretical what there could be out there waiting for us. I just don't know. I know the GRC side of it will be tremendously complex and difficult. I'm glad to be in that because the problems are just massive. And anytime you have problems that big and complex, it's good to be in the early stage of it. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting few years.
I appreciate you sharing your perspectives on that. I mean, I know some of this is still sort of opinion based, making these projections. Going back to something personal about you that I really liked, you describe yourself as a global explorer. And I was wondering what that means to you and what it means to how you kind of like derive value from life. Do you feel like you must travel every so many months or years, or how do you quantify that and how did that start for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I've always had that bug. Like, it's just, I want to go see places. I want to experience them authentically. I think our connections and relationships with other people are how we grow and how we experience the world. And I think experiencing other cultures and connecting with other cultures and people, and that could be through conversations when they're possible without the language barriers, but through food and through just experiencing what it's like to be in other cities and see how people live. Just that's just where I found just a tremendous amount of personal growth and the ability to relate to people. And so it's very sort of mind expanding to me to go and see how, how people ultimately solve problems, right? Because I mean, if you go to a major city, there are lots of different ways of solving the sort of operating system of big cities. And every time I travel, there's some new lesson, some new insight, something new that I come across that causes me to think a little bit differently about the world than I did before. So it is something that's quite addictive. I was in Vietnam a week and a half ago. Just before that, I was in Thailand, and then I was in Korea I was in Korea during the protests calling for impeachment of the president who just got impeached overnight. Love those places, Vietnam especially. It's such highly recommended. It's such an incredible country. But yeah, I think moving as a teenager from Ireland to the US, there was a culture shock then. And I was thinking about it more recently. I don't really experience culture shock anymore because I'm sort of used to having to go and navigate new areas. The closest I got was I went to a wedding in Eastern Turkey a few years ago in like the heart of Kurdistan, of Kurdish Turkey. And that was culturally very different than anything I had experienced before. In the middle of lentil fields, dancing around for a wedding in very hot clothes while people shot guns in the air. That was an interesting experience. I'm sort of just telling travel stories now, but let me know if I answered your question.
I think that's excellent. Being someone who, like you said, you don't really experience culture shock anymore. I think that's really cool. It's something that I think brings a lot of value to a person's life, to be experiencing different cultures and learning to adapt and deal with them at different times. I think that's really powerful. Now, in this community, we've had a couple of different conversations that have circled around sort of the ethics of AI. Now that you're sort of exploring the space and everything, what's your opinion on that particular topic? If you think AI should be regulated, shouldn't be regulated, should be democratized, that sort of thing, where do you sit within that axis?
I think it absolutely should be regulated. It's just going to be how quickly the regulators are able to adapt to the environment that's building these systems. I won't name names, but that there are major companies in the space where there have been some controversy about their internal ethics. And I think put it this way, I think the board members at OpenAI had a point. I think that, so I will name names a little bit, we need to be very careful about how we proceed in this. I mean, when you look at some of the things that happened with social media that got out of control with Cambridge Analytica and things like that, like it shows you just how powerful systems that have this kind of reach can be. AI is so much more powerful than that, right? So I think it absolutely needs to be regulated. I don't know how you manage that globally. People have compared it to nuclear energy, nuclear power as being this sort of very powerful global force. And obviously, you have global regulation around how nuclear power is used and how the technology is distributed and things like that. Something comparable to that will likely be necessary for AI. It's just, can we build it before those risks present themselves in really dangerous ways? And that's something that I'm working in now, very early stage. This business is quite early stage. The more we look at the regs that are out there, the more sort of contradictory and complex they tend to be, and the more difficult they are to comply with. How they will actually work in terms of managing the AI systems themselves is to be seen. I don't think we know.
Yeah, looking into reading about synergist technology, I see a lot of the key terms: responsible AI governance and compliance, and AI risk management, and all of it sounds wonderful. From your perspective and your experience so far, how does the organization kind of see itself as a leader? How is it seeking to kind of set itself apart in such a rapidly evolving and largely unregulated space?
The tool that we are launching early next year, which we've got some prototypes in place now, is a monitoring tool. So you've deployed an enterprise AI system within your org. Most of the companies we're talking to are consulting firms. There are some governmental, like some state governments, some areas of federal, and then we have some private companies looking at this as well. Say you've deployed enterprise AI and you want to know how well that system is performing in terms of the guardrails that you have for internal policy and your external regs. And those regs could be AI-specific regs, are regulations that don't necessarily mention AI, but your system could still put you out of compliance with. We're doing sort of continuous monitoring of those systems to make sure that you're not seeing things like drift and bias from those systems. Great example is New York has a law, NY 144, essentially states that if you are using any kind of automation to review resumes, you need to audit that system once a year to make sure that it's not building in bias, right? That it's not discriminating against certain populations who are applying. That's a great use case for what we do. Because if you're using an AI resume review tool, we can continuously audit that via monitoring, via like running scenarios against your AI systems to make sure that you're not creeping into bias, which they all do at some point. It's just a matter of when. So we would then provide reports back to that org and give them some guidance on how to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, that seems to be a major concern with AI, like not having bias come into the system. As you say, like they all do. My understanding, which could be, I'm not informed enough, but is like because the reason they all do is because the bias comes from the people. Is that a correct understanding?
If the data that you're feeding to the system has bias inherently included in it, as societies do, then yes, that's going to present itself as the systems do what you've asked them to do. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you very much. Now, one of the questions that's sort of a bit of a left field in regards to the entrepreneurship perspective, but I think is always interesting to talk about is how you sort of balance work, family life, everything else that you're passionate about, hobbies, whatever it is, how you get that balance. Because in entrepreneurship, there's such a strong inclination to, I would say, extremes, which, to be totally honest, I am definitely a part of. But how do you go about trying to find some level of semblance of sanity and balance in your life?
Yeah, so a few things. I mean, one thing I'll say is I think the American way of work, where you don't take holidays very often and things like that, I think gets it wrong. I think you'd be far more effective taking time off and taking breaks, and that the net result of taking time away makes you more productive, not less. I'm a big fan. And like when I've run businesses, I've unlimited vacation, encourage people to take them, encourage people to fully disconnect, to make sure you build systems of redundancy in so that you don't have to contact people when they're away. I'm a big proponent of that. In terms of managing the balance, I think a lot of it comes down to health. Yeah, I mentioned in my intro that longevity is a thing that I'm into. Really, it's just health, right? Eating well, exercise, things like meditation and other practices, and there are many different ones. But I think those things help keep you grounded when everything else seems chaotic. Yeah, I read a few years ago that like the hardest thing about entrepreneurship, about running a business, is really staying in control of your own emotions, right? Just like making sure that you're able to look past the obstacles that are in front of you and not let the stress get to you, because there's an immense amount of pressure, especially you take on investor capital and you have a payroll to hit. And often then with a payroll to hit, you've got employees that are getting married and having kids and buying houses and stuff, which is great. It's my favorite thing about building a business is giving people career opportunities. Well, then if you have a cash flow issue one quarter, or a customer doesn't pay on time or doesn't pay you at all, you're sort of bearing the load of that responsibility for these people and your investors. The pressure will be there. So you have to figure out a way to release it or manage it. For me, it's exercise. It's working out and things like meditation, reading, and obviously for me, travel as well. Just getting away, seeing different parts of the world, it totally resets my brain. I come back refreshed. So all of the above, but I can't overstate how important the eating well and exercising is. It's just both of those things take a lot off tremendously and just makes you feel better about life in general.
I completely agree with you. And I like that you put meditation in there too, because I think sometimes we forget that like we do need that mental well-being aspect as well, and time for ourselves. And it is really interesting talking to people around the world about how they can notice that work till you drop mentality really doesn't have a better productivity rate. It might be much worse, actually. I take that lesson well as an American. Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code VOYAGE. That's vidops.io, referral code VOYAGE. Now back to the show. I know we were talking a little bit a couple questions ago, and I have a question kind of building off of that. So to give a little context, I know on your LinkedIn profile, it says you have experience in strategic leadership and a proven track record of closing complex deals with Fortune 500 companies. And you kind of quantified that you've helped some companies get to a position where they could sell. The question from one of our listeners is, can you share a little bit more about how you would manage that transition process? Because it can be quite an emotional roller coaster for someone that has invested their entire life into their company. And I'm sure you've met those individuals both in a business and personal sense. What advice do you give to someone like that who might be looking to sell to an enterprise company?
Sure. Yeah. So first piece of advice is everything's going to take longer than you expect. Be patient, right? It's going to take always much longer than you expect. But if you play the game the right way, those deals will get over the line. As long as you have a real product market fit, or rather product company fit, whatever the entity might be on the other side. As long as you have real value that you believe in and you can see, and that your champion on the other side can see, then it's just a matter of working the process and being patient. I'll go through two. So one is public, I can talk about it. So with Epigraph, that company publishes 3D assets to the web. The long game for that company was looking at smart glasses as the eventual dominant screen. So moving from holding the screen in your hand to wearing it on your face. So that means you have to have 3D for any object that a person might buy. Say Vision Pro version 5 or 6, that's a daily wearable. And think about doing shopping via e-commerce with that being your screen. Well, you need to have 3D objects for everything. And you saw a lot of traction in 3D in furniture over the past few years. IKEA rolled out a tool about 10 years ago, and everyone else kind of followed suit with augmented reality for furniture. We got a footprint in hard lines, things like lawnmowers, which are larger and where augmented reality makes sense. I did a deal with Ace Hardware where we were taking those 3D experiences and publishing them to Ace. Ace is a big company, lots of locations, not very driven by digital, but they do a lot of in-store. And there's some value to having 3D experiences in store as well, like AR in the aisle. Target's done it, and some other retailers have done it. That deal meant a full security review of the business, right? So their data security team is freaked out by the hacks at companies like Target. Any startup that works with them, especially if you're publishing to their site, you need to go through a pretty deep data security review. That means buttoning up your internal systems. It means going through all the exercise necessary to make sure your office access is controlled, for example, which not everyone's is, right? Especially if you're working in a co-working space or something like that. So there are lots of very boring things that you have to work through to get to the point where they can sign, but they are all good investments in the longevity of your company anyway, so you should do them. That took a lot of time. We had to do a pilot with them to ensure that performance was there. So we did a 6-month pilot where we took an experience, put it on one of their sites, measured the analytics behind that. That pilot didn't pay us very much. It was a very small amount of money on the implementation side. It was not profitable. It was just something that we had to do to earn the business. So then you've got probably a 90-day security review, a 6-month pilot. After the 6-month pilot, you got to get everyone's attention again to look at all the data. After that, you've got to think about implementation and wait for their web team to have time on the calendar to actually implement you. That will inevitably get pushed due to seasons or new releases or whatever it might be. So be patient, work the process, but more than anything, find a champion within that entity who will take your solution and go with it. And we had a great champion at Ace We did deals with a few other major. Stanley Black and Decker is another big client. Found a great champion with Stanley Black and Decker who was interested in publishing. Lowe's the same way. Companies like Home Depot, we talked to people at a very high level there. We had a number of different conversations, built a couple of relationships. Never really had a great champion, and that footprint never really took off, right? It was not nearly as big as the others, where we just had somebody who believed in what we were doing and would go after it. Other thing I recommend is in-person meetings. You often don't have a big budget as a small startup, so you don't think about travel because it's expensive. Shoestring travel. Book the Spirit flight that's the cheapest, that puts you through 2 other airports first, and stay in the Airbnb that has terrible reviews. Whatever it takes to get FaceTime, go and do it. It really matters. The same is true with conferences. Go to conferences, buy the most basic pass you can, or sneak in if you have to. Sorry, I've only done that once because it was very expensive. Just go and talk to the people that are in market. But it is worth those investments to go and meet with people, especially if it's your champion and someone that you've had some conversations with. The other piece I'll say is contracts are critically important. You will spend a lot of time going through contracts. Try to have contracts yourself that are good enough that when the lawyers on the other side of the table at the Fortune 500 company, when they see them, they can use them, like meaning have enough empathy when you're drafting your contracts to understand their system, that you're not giving them a pile of work to do that will take months. And understand those contracts yourself. Do not let a lawyer write it all for you and then just hand it off. That's never a good idea. Learn contract law, or not contract law, but learn how contracts work, how they're structured, and be able to speak to them. You will save a ton of time when somebody asks you, hey, what about this clause? What about limitation of liability? What about this? If you can understand those and respond in real time on a call, rather than saying, I have to ask my lawyer, and you pay them and then it goes to their lawyer, that's absolutely critical. And it's often the hardest part too. Like, you can get everyone to agree, and then things get hung up in the contract phase. So be efficient, be fast, have good documents, know those documents, and make sure that they are ones that can be accepted by, at least reviewed by the other side fairly easily. And I will say this, I've done this a ton. I may be giving way too broad advice. Contact me if you need help with any of these. I've done a lot of it and I love working in it. So if any of you are listening to this and need assistance with these pieces specifically, I'm happy to help.
Thank you very much. I think it's one of those things that feels like growing up in a startup where you're like, oh, we have to be like, put on our big boy or big girl pants now and like have the right contracts and have the right processes and everything. I think that's a really good point. And I appreciate you taking us through that.
It's funny, like a lot of times not great products will win because they have that stuff figured out, right? And a lot of founders mistake it in thinking if you have the best product, then you'll win. Well, you need these other pieces as well, right? And they're as important as the product, because the legal team on the other side doesn't care about your product, right? They care about what the terms are. So you have to nail all of those when working with a bigger org.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, the maybe somewhat less good or inferior product can win just because it's way, way easier for the legal team to implement. I think that's a really important point.
Say it all the time, like people who have relationships, meaning they have that champion and they know the process, they know how those big entities work. Inferior products win all the time with just those 2 things in place.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, you've got quite a varied experience, which is something that I really respect. I would love to get your perspective on what makes a founder or a founding team successful. What characteristics, knowledge bases, skill sets do you think are in every startup necessity?
I always start with values. So writing down the values of the org from the beginning, and making sure the founding team and the core team at the beginning understands those values, and then act within them as you make decisions. I think if you can steer every behavior back to a set of values, and then if something goes wrong and somebody steps outside of those values, call them on it. Like, hey, this is where this I think that aligns everyone around a set of sort of guiding principles that you can use day to day. I think that's absolutely critical. I think some companies do it really well, and some not as well. But for me, when leading a team, them understanding the values of the business is key. Outside of that, hire well, right? Do very careful, thorough interviews. I'm a fan. Not everyone's a fan of personality profiling. I am. I think it works. When you do things like disc profiling and stuff like that, it can be tremendously helpful to just knowing a bit more about who people are beyond the interview and hiring them to fit them into the right slots, particularly in the manager individual contributor dynamic. I think if you get their profiles correct, you have a far more likely chance of success than if you don't.
I appreciate that advice, and also that you led with values first. I think that there's multiple business books about this, but in reality, I think a lot of people really struggle to not hire just based on skills. Skills, I think, are a lot easier for people to take on than values, typically speaking, in my experience. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's really good advice. So when you were talking about your varied experience and you were sharing that you did telemarketing for a while and that you were quite good at it, I've definitely had some phone bank jobs, and I'm sure that person to person experience, being able to kind of win people over, helped you in situations like what you were describing with like the Ace Hardware data security review. What do you think, like some of those early key jobs, like how do you really see that those developed you as a person? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think sometimes we look back at the past and we're like, man, I just wasted 5 years of my life working at a fast food restaurant and a portrait studio, and like I could have just been on this career trajectory. So how do you look at that and say, I really see that I got some of the skills that I use to consult with enterprises from this job? When you look back, what do you think are the skills you took from those jobs?
It's just learned persistence, right? I mean, a lot of startup success or any other success is how persistent you are, how many no's you can take before you get to the yes. So in my case, it was an outbound calling call center. I can't even remember what the product was, some sort of insurance product. You make 100 calls and one person listens to you, and then you get them to spend $8 a month or whatever it was on credit card insurance. I can't even, this is a long time ago now, but yeah, it's just persistence, right? And I think every experience presents some opportunity. And if you lament your past, it's not going to provide you that opportunity, right? So for me, it was not a great job. I was 19 in college working at a call center, grinding away. I wouldn't go back and do it again, but it was definitely a great lesson in persistence. You had a lot of people who would come and flame out, right? They'd work there for a few days and get let go because they weren't making sales. It was very much a pressure environment. You get to the point where it's persistence plus creativity, right? You switch up your methods a little bit until you unlock the way to get to success. And that's really what a lot of life and career is in the end.
Absolutely. I think it's good to be able to look back on those past experiences and feel like these are at the time not the most fun experiences, but they sort of gave me the skills that I'm really leveraging today. And I think that's powerful. It gives you such a positive perspective. When you're in a bad time now, you can be like, well, maybe in 5 years, I'll look back at now and be like, this is the key to how I succeeded in other things. Now, if we were to take it for a little bit of an introspective spin, how do you feel that you have personally changed your leadership style, your skill set, your mentality over your entrepreneurial journey? What do you think has been the things that you've been like, this is good, but I have to level up, so to speak? And what are things that you think you've been able to take the whole way through? What's your perspective there?
Yeah, so I can give a couple of pieces of perspective. So one is, I think if money is the main thing that matters to you at the stage of the career I am, then you've gone wrong somewhere. Growing up poor, being sort of young and trying to hustle and get there, it mattered. It was top of the list, right? Go and figure out how to make money. But later, I think I've learned that money is it's a side effect of good work. You do good work, you build good products, you treat people well, that the money will come. And I think I talked about values earlier. If your value as an org has making money at the top of it, whether stated or unstated, because there are some companies where it's unstated, but that's it. I don't think you're going to build a very happy place. I don't think you're going to be a very happy person. I think that money is only as good as your values. And I think in America, especially, we're taught in ways that excess will solve all of your problems, and it doesn't. So that's been a really good lesson that I'm very happy to have learned. Yeah. Second to that, it's supporting and caring about people. So the people on your team, I mentioned earlier that had employees that had gotten married, had kids, bought houses and stuff while working for us. Those are really the things that matter, right? And like knowing those people, knowing their lives a bit, caring about them, understanding what they go through, what they need, that will get loyalty and their best work. So really just being a player coach and supporting people as much as you can is absolutely key to getting the most out of an organization. Leadership matters far less than individual contributors in that regard, right? Like the individual contributors are doing the vast majority of the work. So your ego is not going to do you any favors as a leader in those orgs. I think being humble and understanding just how much smarter everyone else is combined than you at the end of the day, and how much more intelligent many of them are on an individual basis as well, is the best way to go and the happiest way to go. And that's how you build really great companies.
I appreciate that you see it that way. It's not always easy for people to see leadership that way. I think sometimes they feel like, well, I'm supposed to know something that no one else knows. I'm supposed to be this visionary. I see it more your way. And I don't know if this is misplaced. You can tell me, but like more of being like the hype person and making sure that people feel like they have everything they need to be at their best. So I think it's really interesting that you've worked in so many different countries, not only with different industries, but something that we're really interested in as a global community is that experience of trying to bridge the gap across cultural context can play a huge role too in companies' ability to work together. What has been the most complicated situation for you to try to navigate in that space? If it was just a misunderstanding, or if it was just the norms of business being totally different in one country versus another, or going back to what you said about the way contracts were written, that made me think of it too. I know in the US, insurance and contracts, all of those things are a little bit different than they are in some other cultures. So, from your perspective, what do you think has been the most complicated situation to try to navigate?
The funniest one is when my former employer bought a company based in England, and I was sent to London to sort of help them integrate pieces. And I was there for a little while. In the US, you don't leave the office at 3 o'clock and go down to the pub every day. And they did. There's quite a drinking culture in England that did not necessarily mesh well with how the US team thought about a work day. It was great for team spirit, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of those people, I'm still friends with them today, years later, and they're all still friends years later because the camaraderie was amazing. But also you had a team that had just exited, right? So they had done some of them quite well on that exit. So they're celebrating and not necessarily as dedicated to work as they might have been before. I'll say this, like they got a lot done there. There was a lot to that team. They executed very well. And it goes back to the thing I said earlier about the US having this culture of like, don't take holidays, be at your desk all day. There's something to taking off early and enjoying your time with your colleagues and talking over a few drinks that created some outcomes that weren't as visible to the US team, who just saw it as it's 3:30. Why aren't you at your desk? I think of some other examples. So actually, I'm in Mexico now. I'm based here over winter. There's a community of people here who work in lots of different countries, right? So there's sort of this digital nomad community here that gets together. I have noticed that there are some there seems to be a work culture that's fairly common, driven by the structure of the sort of US high growth startup. And a lot of these companies work with them. That's been something interesting to see, just how standardized a lot of those things are. The language is quite standardized and everything else. Main challenge that I've seen is not cultural as much as time zones really are it. Getting people together when they're in different time zones. I had a team for a while that was, let's see, London, Paris, Singapore, Sydney, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Doing a conference call with that team is close to impossible, right? Somebody's working really late and doesn't want to be. I think that is the biggest challenge. And when you're outsourcing work, it's the same way. So I've done a lot of outsourcing to different countries. And it's just, you send a change to that you are requesting from somebody in India, you may get it the next day or the day after. And then with the weekends, it becomes quite difficult to keep a good cadence of work going. Contract wise, I don't know. I've never seen any I mean, India's tricky for contracts and for establishing businesses there, which I've done. There's quite a lot of corruption, and you kind of have to participate in some of it to do business there, at least where we were and what we were trying to create. Those are the only examples I can think of.
Wow, that's super interesting. I mean, I can't even imagine having a team that was that globally diverse. You'd have people like it's 3 a.m. in Sydney and middle of the day in Paris, and then very morning of the day in San Francisco or something. Like, that's got to be incredibly difficult. And I definitely sympathize with that situation.
Yeah, I remember arriving on a holiday in Spain and driving to the hotel, getting there at 2 a.m. and immediately jumping on a phone call because that's something I had to do. I had some work that had to be done even when I was on holiday. So yeah, I don't miss that. It was hard.
Totally understand that. One of the things we like to ask about, because we try and take a focus on the difficulties of the entrepreneurial journey, is we like to ask about major pivots or big deviations from the plan at a time. Do you have any particular examples that you pull out as like, this is something that I had to distinctly deviate from the plan that I had in your past experience?
Yeah, you mentioned my career trajectory earlier and sort of the diversity of it. Not that I get bored, I just want to experience different things. Like I want to look at different areas and understand them, and I'll do that for a while and then try to go to another one. I think the biggest pivot was probably the move from 10 years in a high growth ad tech firm. I was running a $50 million business at the end of that run to doing strategic M&A work for a VC fund. And that happened almost completely by accident. I was speaking to the firm that backed that fund about repurposing their technology to solve an issue with fraud and ad tech. They had it's a high frequency trading firm, and they had all this really clever technology around very fast decision making. And there was a problem with ads at that time where you saw quite a lot of fraud that was hurting publishers. And the goal was to take that technology and allow the publishers to identify fraud more quickly, and therefore open up the doors of them sort of making more money by being less restrictive around what ads they used. Anyway, so that was a conversation with the founder of the high frequency trading firm. And then I got a phone call the next day saying, hey, we're spinning up this venture arm. We want to work with startup. We want to either invest in or buy startups in sort of a family office structure under that firm. And it just sounded so interesting to me, like to sit on that side again and have a fund that I could then deploy. So that was a big pivot that it didn't work out in the end. I mean, I was there for 6 months, and I say that it was a great opportunity. I learned a lot, but it was not something that was long term for me. That was a pretty big pivot. And then I sort of went back to my path before of founding a startup this time, but working in ad tech, martech again after that, albeit in a very different area. I was working in much more within retailers and e-commerce. And then pivoting now to this role, which again, kind of came together by accident. It was networking a little bit, talked to a couple of people that were doing interesting things in AI. And then I got recruited for the global partnerships role at Synergist. Very different, right? I'm working now with government entities and consulting firms, which is not something I have any experience in, but I get to sort of adapt my knowledge to that and do this. And it's been a very interesting few months just so far in working within this.
That's excellent. It sounds like you've found a balance for yourself for now. I kind of am wondering how you're going to decide what you go into next. I mean, a lot of us are graduates of the MIT boot camps program. So we think of it as like, what problem do you want to solve next? So with your varied experience and your skills, is there a problem that maybe you haven't gotten a chance to delve into that you'd like to do something with in the future?
The common thread of my career is that problem that I talked about earlier, which is like, how do you get an early stage product into a major enterprise deal? A major enterprise company are several of those. So I'm going to keep doing that. What I do that for, doing it now for AIGRC. I will continue doing that. And then I would like to do it further within AI or within some of the really clever problems that are being solved out there with it. Where within that, I don't know. Ad tech, martech is my primary background prior to the GRC side. So I'm not sure. I know it will be that thread because just that's what I'm good at. That's what I'm sort of called to do. It's just a matter of who I help next or how I help them. I've got a couple of advisory engagements sort of on the side now that are leading toward that as well. So we'll see. If anyone's listening and they need help with that, definitely contact me. It's what I love doing.
I do want you to interpret this question in the way that makes sort of the most sense to you, because it is sort of very personal, or not personal, but specific to the individual. And the question is, what do you think has been the best lesson or takeaway from your journey so far? Or, in other words, what words of wisdom do you want to leave us with? Whether that's something from a book, could be from when you watch Game of Thrones, could be from your grandparent, could be something you thought up yourself. What do you think would be the best words of wisdom to leave us with?
There's a common thread that goes through Stoicism, Buddhism, lots of other schools of thought, and that is the obstacle is the way, right? Which is the title of a book, a pop Stoic book. Everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear or some sort of challenge or something internal that you have to break through. I think just being honest about that, leaning into it, and being brave enough to take the leap is really what it's all about for all of us. Building a company, I've heard it's jumping off a cliff and building a parachute on the way down, which I think is a good analogy. It's very frantic. I think we all come across cliffs that tempt us to jump in life. And I think the more of them we make calculated jumps off, the happier in the end we'll be, as painful as the jump is in the beginning. But go toward those things that are fearful, that are difficult, take the leaps. And again, I said earlier that managing a startup, building a business is about understanding your own emotions and controlling your own emotions to some extent. Do the work to understand them, and then gain the courage and the sort of self-knowledge to face those fears and go after it. That's the biggest lesson I've learned. It's very hard. It's hard every time. It never gets easier. There's no way to solve it, but that's ultimately what you got to do.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Jasper. We really appreciate you taking this time with us and everything you shared with us and taught us today. I know you've been traveling recently. I'm sure you're a little behind on sleep. So extra thanks for that. We really do appreciate it.
Welcome. Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you.
Well, thank you so much again. And we wish you and everyone a great day ahead.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.